I wasn't really sure where to start because I have so many different things that I've done over the years, but I figured I'd start with a video for those of you who are at the very beginning of your journey and who don't really know what to do, where to start. I'll just get to the more complicated stuff later. So what I present here is relatively easy to do, and I'm sure many of you are probably already doing it. But I think it has been instrumental for me in developing the mindset which will later make me able to have the awakening experience that I had. So, before I had my awakening experience, which was about 4 years ago, I didn't really have any concept of enlightenment. I wasn't pursuing enlightenment. What I wanted was I wanted to better myself and I wanted to become happy. That was my goal. But leading up to that experience, I can see now in hindsight that I was doing some things that really helped me and really helped my brain to become programmed in the right way, completely unintentionally. So I would argue that my journey started when I was 17, because that's when I started to deliberately analyze myself and really figure out what I was feeling, why I was feeling it, who I was, and stuff like that. So it wasn't structured really. I just contemplated my emotions and my behavior whenever I felt or did something. So because I've been doing that for so many years, looking analytically and I guess objectively at the world has become almost second nature to me. And I think that this has been crucial in predisposing me for the experience that I would later have. And the reason I think this, I don't know if you can call it a technique, but yeah, whatever. The reason that this self-analysis is valuable, I think, is because it will help you realize how much of a slave of your emotions you really are. Because what I noticed after a while of doing this is that very often I would do things that wasn't helpful with regards to becoming happy, which was my goal. And I sometimes thought of my body as this weird robot that did things that was completely out of my control. So I just took some general things like sacrificing long-term happiness for short-term pleasure. Like, for example, if you eat a lot of candy, okay, so that feels good in the moment, but a few hours later you might have a stomach ache, or if you're thinking really long-term, you are destroying your health maybe. Also procrastination. I mean, we all do this, I guess. Even if you feel really bad about something that you have to do, you just push it ahead in front of you instead of just doing it. I also had this really weird thing, I still have, that I'm a saver. I save everything. So, for example, when I was a kid, if I would get a battery-driven toy, I would always save the battery and not use the batteries in the toy, which was really stupid because obviously my parents would just buy me some new batteries. It wouldn't be a problem at all. And they told me, but it was as if I couldn't stop myself from wanting to save the battery. And I have the same thing with clothing. If I buy clothing that I really like and I really appreciate, I'll not wear it as much to save it for a rainy day, I guess. It's as if my brain is programmed in the opposite way of most people for some reason. Also, I'm sure most people are familiar with this one, zapping through the internet, looking for entertainment, and you're really feeling rather miserable doing it, but the drive to find the entertainment and the pleasure on the internet just keeps you hooked, even though you're not having a good time. And also, I thought of the fear of spiders. If you're living in a tropical climate, I can understand it, but if you are living in the north like me, there is no point in being afraid of spiders, and yet so many people are. So as I said, what I would do when I would analyze myself wasn't structured in any way, but I've come up with 4 points that you could use if you want to try to analyze yourself. If you scour the internet, I'm sure that you can find other models or questions to ask yourself, but this is just what I've come up with based on what I've been doing. And I'll get through some examples from my own life in a minute. So the first thing I would always do was to try to pinpoint what emotion I was feeling. And I mean, it could be anything: fear, sadness, anger, a feeling of superiority or whatever. But very often I found that what I was feeling was a mix of emotions, and sometimes it wasn't easy to figure out what I was actually feeling because of this weird mix of emotions. So that might be a challenge sometimes and can be revealing. Then the next point is trying to figure out how the emotion was triggered. What was the exact situation that really triggered this emotion? And then the third point is, how was your reaction to the emotion? What did you do, and what consequences did this emotion have on what you did? And then the fourth point is trying to explain why this emotion was triggered. Why did you have this emotion? And if this emotion is something that regularly comes up in your life, then it can be very helpful to go back in time and try to figure out what the initial trigger of the emotion was. Okay, I'll go through 2 examples from my own life just to give you an idea of how to go about this. So the first one is when I would receive a grade in school. I'm thinking mostly of high school right now. So the emotion would be a mix of disappointment and embarrassment. And the emotion was triggered when I would compare the grade I had had with my classmates' grade. And if I hadn't had the biggest grade of all of us, I would be disappointed. The emotion would be triggered. So I might actually be pleased with the grade initially, before I had compared it with anyone else's. But as soon as I saw that I wasn't doing any better that's when I would feel the emotion. And the response I would have was I would be unable to motivate myself for schoolwork for at least a few days after receiving a grade. And also I would be very socially awkward because I felt embarrassed over the grade I had had. And so now we get to the reason. So the thing is, when I was a kid, when I was say up to 11 years old, I was very popular amongst my peers, especially amongst girls. All of the girls wanted to play with me, I guess because I was very creative and fun to be around. And this made me develop a very huge ego. I think looking back, I had narcissistic tendencies. And when I entered school as a kid, I got the idea that I was the best in school, that I was doing better than anyone else. And obviously in the small grades, I don't know how it is in your country, but in my country, in the small grades, the kids don't receive grades, and so it would be easy for me to convince myself that I was doing better than anyone else, because there was no teacher to tell me that I wasn't. So this created this thirst for admiration without effort. So I would, in the smaller grades, I would be used to feeling like the best without really putting any effort into my work. And this I carried with me, this thirst for this admiration, but without effort. I somehow felt that if I worked hard at something and achieved something, then it wasn't as admirable. And also the lack of motivation I would feel after receiving a relatively low grade was, I felt that there was no point in trying if I couldn't get what I wanted, which was the admiration. And obviously if I got a grade that wasn't better than anyone else's, then there was nothing to admire. And so if I couldn't get a grade that was better than anyone else's, then nobody would admire me, and therefore it wasn't worth it to work for or to strive for. And obviously to do better than anyone else was completely unrealistic because I wasn't working very hard in school. But the funny thing is that after receiving a grade, for example, and being made aware that I wasn't doing better than anyone else, I would somehow, my brain would convince me over the following few days that I was better than I was, and that would set me up for another bout of failure later, when I would again realize that I wasn't doing any better. And the embarrassment was really a matter of me being quite obsessed with admiration more so than likability. Likability wasn't something that I valued at all back then in high school. What I wanted was the admiration. That's what I thirsted after. That was the hunger that was created in my childhood and that I just couldn't quench. And so when I had this laser focus on admiration and yet couldn't get it, that was kind of embarrassing. And so, yeah, I was very perpetually embarrassed as a teenager. And so that was really the main struggle in my life, and it wasn't really until I had the awakening experience later that I finally realized how to solve this. Because these emotions were, even though I was very aware of them, it was really, really difficult to do anything about it. I couldn't control my emotions; they were just there. Yeah. Then the other thing I wanted to, the other example I wanted to mention was the death of my cat. I had a really weird reaction to that. So the emotion, funnily enough, was no sadness. I felt no sadness, so it was, I guess, an absence of emotion, really. And in terms of response, I think of her a lot, and always with a sense of happiness and fondness and warm feelings, never negative feelings at all, ever. And this happens pretty much daily, even though it was about 2 years ago since she was euthanized. And I think the reason why I have had this response to her death was that, so first of all, she died after I had my awakening experience. And so after I had this awakening experience, I have had the need for pleasure from other sources in my life have greatly diminished. I just don't feel that I need anything else in life for some reason. And so the need for her was much smaller. And also she was living with my parents, and so I only saw her when I went to their place. And the rest of the time when I was at home, I would think of her with warm feelings, and so the situation, at least when I'm in my own place, hasn't really changed, because I thought of her a lot back then. I still do, so in that sense it hasn't really changed much. And also after I had this awakening experience, because I've become much less needy of other sources of pleasure, I've sensitized myself to negative experiences. So the negative emotions I would have towards her were amplified in a way. So, for example, she would very often wake me up in the middle of the night just to have something to eat or to be let outside. And she would, if I woke up early, this is when I'm at my parents' place, and then if I woke up early to work, she would come in and want to play with me, and I didn't have the time to do that. So that was kind of annoying, because I felt bad that I wouldn't play with her because I was busy. Very often I would want to be around her and she would just ignore me completely. She's a cat. She was a cat. So the balance, I guess, between the positive and the negative emotions has shifted, so that the positive emotions aren't really worth the negative emotions. And that's why I don't really miss her, I guess. I still think of her quite a lot, but that's because it gives me pleasure, just as it did before. And now we're on the topic, pleasure is a terrible distraction, but I'll get to that later. So a little note before I end this video is that I don't do self-analysis anymore, really. I've moved on to doing other techniques, but I think that as a starting point, if you are just at the beginning of a journey, I think this is a good starting point for you. And also the beauty of this practice is that even if you are not seeking enlightenment or awakening, if you're just looking to better your life in general, I think this is the way to go. I noticed a lot of improvement in my own life from doing this analysis and becoming aware of why I was thinking and feeling the way I was. And the last point I want to make is it might be a good idea to write these things down in a journal. I did that, and the benefit of that is that so you can compare different emotions and triggers in various situations and across time to try to figure out a pattern in your own emotional life and behavior. And that's it. So I hope you got at least something from this video. I'm sorry it got a little messy, I guess, but I hope to see you in the next one.